All right, guys, so this is part 5, depressants, if you missed any or all of part 5. So this should suffice in getting you to know what to do to fill out the study guide and for what the test questions are going to be. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through this, but to ask to not waste your time. So we talked about the sympathetic nervous system last time. Opiates and other depressants activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which basically does the opposite stuff. It, instead of dilating your pupils, it constricts your pupils, it lowers your blood pressure, increases your digestion, and it does this, and also gives you some euphoria. It does this so that you can either digest your food after you eat a meal, or to induce sleep. And those are basically the two reasons why your parasympathetic system exists, to slow you down and make you stop and rest for a while after you have eaten a bunch of food so that you can digest, or when you need to go to sleep, it induces sleep then. So, first thing, the opium poppy. The opium poppy, it contains two chemicals, codeine and morphine. Those are naturally occurring. Opium, the actual thing, is the sap, is the juice that comes out of the seed pod when you scratch the seed pod. Now, morphine and codeine are used for mild to moderate pain relief. Vicodin contains codeine as well as OxyContin and Norco and a bunch of other generic compounds. Morphine is used for emergency pain relief. If you go to the hospital and you're like a compound fracture or something, and they want to stop you from moving so they can stick your bone back in your body, then they might give you morphine as emergency pain relief. Morphine is then processed into heroin. Heroin is synthetic, morphine is naturally occurring. So opium looks like this. Opium is the flower that looks like this, and here's the seed pod. So we scratch the outside of the seed pod, and then you scrape off the sap that is coming out of the outside, and that is what opium is. Now, most opium in the world comes from two different places, Afghanistan and Myanmar, which used to be called Burma. That's why it's called Burma on this graphic right here. So heroin is just like morphine, only it has these two extra groups on the sides. So morphine has these two alcohol groups, these OH groups right here, and then heroin has these two extra acetyl groups. They're called acetyl groups on the sides. That makes heroin less polar than morphine, so it's more able to dissolve in fat tissues, as well as it's able to cross the blood-brain barrier quite a bit easier. Both heroin and morphine do the same thing inside your brain. It's just when you inject morphine or get it into your system in some way, not a whole lot of it gets into your brain because it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. Heroin, on the other hand, when you put it into your system, into your body, it crosses the blood-brain barrier very effectively, and so more of it gets up inside your brain. Heroin was first synthesized in 1874 by a British chemist working at St. Mary's Hospital named Sierra Alder Wright. He boiled morphine with pure vinegar on a stove for several hours and produced heroin. So heroin can be smoked. You can't just smoke the actual heroin powder directly itself. It'll get into your system that way. It can be snorted. People sometimes do. It can just be ingested. You could dissolve it in some kind of oily substance. Even milk would do fine to dissolve it. Or what most people do who are going to do heroin, they inject it because that's going to produce the most intense high. Or, kind of like how crack is a smokable form of cocaine, you can actually treat heroin with some chemicals to turn it into a solid form that can be vaporized. And then when you vaporize it, you inhale the smoke from it, and that is a smokable form of heroin that is called freebasing, or chasing the dragon. So, positive effects of heroin. The reason why people take heroin is for the euphoria, is for that euphoric, dreamlike state. There are other positive effects that heroin has been used for medicinally in the past, and these include constipatory effects. So if you had chronic diarrhea, like from something like dysentery, then they might give you heroin to slow down the food going through your system so you didn't die of dehydration. It also has been used for anesthetics and pain relief, as well as a cough suppressant. It was used as a cough suppressant back when tuberculosis was a much bigger problem. So they would give it to tuberculosis patients that were in later stages of the disease so that their coughs would be quiet and they could sleep. Negative effects and overdose. So if you are not having diarrhea from dysentery, then it's going to cause constipation. It is also extremely addictive, and we'll talk a little bit in a few slides about what detoxification is about. Also can cause spontaneous abortion if you are pregnant, and causes respiratory arrest. This is how depressants kill you. They generally slow down your breathing and your heart rate. When your breathing slows down, your lungs start to fill up with carbon dioxide. Even more than the need for oxygen is the need to get the carbon dioxide out of your system, because carbon dioxide is toxic to your tissues, and so you have to get the carbon dioxide out of your system. And so your lungs, to prevent your lung tissues from being damaged by that carbon dioxide, will fill up with fluid. And that fluid does protect your lungs from the carbon dioxide, but it also prevents any oxygen absorption. So very commonly you see depicted if somebody is overdosing from heroin, this kind of frothy white liquid dripping out of their mouth, and that is that same fluid that is filling up their lungs and trying to prevent the carbon dioxide necrosis. So the risks of heroin use, overdose, obviously, there's other kind of secondary things from injecting. If you inject, then there's a lot of different other bloodborne pathogens you can get from the needles if they're not technically clean. You can get poisoning from the other stuff that's used to dilute the heroin, because very commonly heroin, the powder that you get won't be pure heroin. It's going to be heroin mixed with some other stuff, and who knows what it's going to be mixed with. Chronic constipation, if you're doing it all the time. Venous sclerosis, just a vein disease that you can get by injecting all over and over. And then tolerance, leading to larger and larger doses to achieve the same effect. So like when you first take heroin, is super awesome effect, and then to get that same effect, you would have to take a larger dose every single time. So strangely enough, addiction does not occur when you use appropriate amounts of heroin. Let me adjust the thing here. There we go. Addiction does not occur as much when you're using appropriate amounts of like Vicodin to manage pain. It still does occur to some degree, which I experienced firsthand when I had a herniated disc in my back that I had to take Vicodin for almost a year to actually help to prevent the pain from making me non-functional as a human. So when I was done with that and I had surgery from the herniated disc and they took out the herniated part, I no longer needed Vicodin. I was pain-free after that, which was nice. After being in pain for almost a year. And so when I stopped, I took Vicodin before the surgery, and then when I had the surgery, I stopped taking Vicodin entirely, and I had to go through withdrawals. Now, they were very, very minor compared to the withdrawal symptoms from heroin normally, but I still did have to go through with them, and mine lasted for about 72 hours, for about 3 days. So the withdrawal symptoms, usually once you are chemically addicted, will start to onset between 6 to 8 hours from the last dose. And withdrawals from heroin suck. They are the worst withdrawals that pretty much exist within the drug world, with any of the things that we're talking about in the drugs unit. So extreme fever, sweating and chills, hallucinations, pain, delirium, spasms. These are all extreme for 24 to 48 hours straight. So you're experiencing all these symptoms for 24 to 48 hours. It sucks super bad. And one of the sucky things about it is any small amount of any opiate, Vicodin or morphine or heroin, will stop these withdrawal symptoms immediately. So they will they'll just immediately stop, and so you're really, really desperate for any sort of relief after 24 to 48 hours of those symptoms. Okay, next one, alcohol, which you guys probably have slightly more experience with. Alcohol is one of the oldest psychoactive drugs known. It's an extremely simple molecule. It's just ethanol, essentially. It's just ethane with an OH group on there. So alcohol is extremely old because it's very easy to make. It basically makes itself. Bacteria that exist pretty much on everything, microbes that exist on everything, they eat up sugars in stuff and they poop out various substances, one of which is alcohol. And whatever you start with determines what kind of alcohol you get. There's different kinds, lots of different kinds of alcohol out there. But all of them are just this molecule with other stuff in it. This is the only thing that really alcohol, the actual chemical that has psychoactive properties, is this thing. Everything else is just other stuff that's in the alcohol, just flavorings and other things that make it taste slightly different, but it's all that stuff. So ethanol, ethyl alcohol, ETOH, these are all ways you can talk about it. So things that you have tried. Fermentation is the process of allowing the bacteria, allowing the microbes to actually eat up the sugars and poop out the alcohol. That's called fermenting. And you can ferment anything with sugar in it. So honey, you can take honey and water, mix that together, leave it alone for a while, the bacteria will eat it up and poop out the alcohol, and that's called mead. If you start with grain and hops, those are carbohydrates, they eat up those, that's how you generally get beer. And if you start with any grapes or fruit juices, that generally will make wine. You can make wine a couple different ways. Most common way is with grapes, but you can make it with other stuff. Now, these are all fermented. Mead and beer usually have somewhere between 6 and 8% alcohol. Wine can have up to between 14 and 16% alcohol, but after that time, the bacteria that were making it actually die from the alcohol content. They essentially drown in their own poop. Anything higher than that, if you want any alcohol that is greater in concentration than 16%, then you would have to distill. Distillation is a process by which things are separated by boiling point. So you'd have to distill the 16%, whatever it was, and then you would have maybe 35% that first time. And so if you do that, it's just straight alcohol, just from grain of potatoes. That's what vodka is. It's just straight ethyl alcohol and water mixed together, and then maybe some filtering or some other flavorings added. If you start with sugar cane and then ferment and distill that, that's what rum is. A mixture of grains that are and then aged in oak barrels once the distillation process is done, that's called whiskey. And if you start with the blue agave cactus and then ferment and distill that, that is called tequila.
I was wondering.
And that's why I should have locked the door. Yay. Okay, so alcohol's effects on your nervous system. It is a depressant, so general overall effects, it causes dizziness and slurred speech and impaired decision processing. So everything seems like a great idea, that's why it's impaired decision making. And also delayed reaction time, that's why you should not drive. And then at higher dosages, nausea, vomiting, and then eventually alcohol poisoning can lead directly to death. I've only had alcohol poisoning one time. Obviously I did not die because I'm still here. But alcohol poisoning only one time, and for 3 days after that, it's not just like being hungover. That's just like a couple hours in the morning, or just a mild headache all day and feeling a little bit nauseated and weak. That's a hangover. But alcohol poisoning, I felt horribly. I barely could eat. For about 3 days, I felt very weak and kind of shaky and could not function very well for about 3 days, but I still went to class, and that was back about 12 years ago. So have not had alcohol poisoning since. It's not a process I would like to repeat. So the metabolism, how your body gets rid of the alcohol, as soon as you ingest any alcohol, your body starts to get rid of it. And it can only get rid of it two ways. It can metabolize it, or it can excrete it. So metabolism takes place in your liver, and the metabolism of alcohol is a zero-order reaction, which means it doesn't matter how much you drink, it gets metabolized at the same rate. It is not concentration dependent at all. It has a rate equal to K, and that's it. And it's because it's dependent on the surface area of where in the liver it is processed. And that's why it has a zero-order reaction. It doesn't matter how much there is, it's only dependent on the surface area where those specific enzymes are in your liver as to how quickly it can be processed. That's only one of the ways it can get out of your system. So it's metabolized just like any other carbohydrate. Or it can be excreted. And it's excreted on your breath, in your sweat, and in your urine. So any way that you get liquids out, it can be excreted in that way. So it's excreted in your breath, you're literally breathing it out as soon as you drink it, and that's why breathalyzers tend to work. It's because the amount of alcohol that is in your actual breath as you breathe out is proportional to the amount of alcohol that is in your system, that is in your blood. Your sweat also contains it, so when you sweat, you also are sweating out, and then it evaporates straight off your skin, and then in your urine, the police can ask you to pee in a cup, and that will tell them how much is in your system as well. So alcoholism is just the chronic use of alcohol. I knew many people in college that claimed not to be alcoholics, but they just drank every day. They said, like, I'm not alcoholic, I just drink every day. What? Right? And the withdrawals are similar to heroin, only much, much less severe. So tremors in the extremities, sweating, fever, chills, spasms, but just not as severe as heroin. So similar withdrawal symptoms to heroin, but just not as severe. And alcoholism, the addiction to alcohol, is much more common than any other drug, simply due to its availability and the public perception of alcohol. Right? Heroin is extremely stigmatized. You don't see people walking around being like just smoking heroin or injecting heroin and being like, oh yeah, no, I only do it at parties. Right? It's not as widely acceptable. But alcohol is widely acceptable and widely available everywhere, and it's cool. It's a thing that people do. Yay, right? It's a social thing. It's now institutionalized and has become part of the American ethos as well as the worldwide ethos in a lot of different places. But I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to convey information. So the legal limit, as far as I remember, and what the last time I researched it, was 0.01 for minors. So anybody under 21 in this case. If you have a alcohol concentration of 0.01 or greater, then that is above your legal limit. For non-minors, it's 0.08, which is equivalent to about 1 drink per hour. So if you have 1 drink, it will put you right around, and 1 drink means 1 glass of wine, it's like 6 ounces of wine, one beer, which is usually between 8 and 12 ounces, or 1 shot of generally distilled alcohol. That'll give you a blood alcohol level of about 0.08. And right around 0.08. So 1 drink, you may be right around this level. I wouldn't chance it, but you might be close to that. If you then wait for an hour, you could have another one. That 1 hour, generally that drink is going to be mostly out of your system, the alcohol level. So if you have about 1 drink per hour, your level, it's going to be right around that level. So if you have a drink and you wait for an hour, it should be less than 0.08. And so for minors, that's like half a drink, half a shot, half a glass of wine. That's going to put you above 0.01. So next one, marijuana, which you guys are probably slightly more, even like with alcohol, more familiar with. So marijuana comes from the cannabis plant, and the chemical that is in the main chemical that is in the cannabis plant is called tetrahydrocannabinol, and that's where THC comes from. There's a secondary molecule actually in all marijuana plants, and actually much more now that it has been cross-produced and has been crossbred to have different characteristics, and that's called CBD, that's cannabidiol. And I'll talk about the differences between the two in a little bit. So marijuana, extremely old as well. It's used in ancient Greece. There's actually references to it in the Greek Bible in Exodus 30:23. They took it out when they translated it into English, but if you look back and study the Greek text, it actually has references to a plant that sounds a lot like cannabis. It's weird. And other people would argue, no, that's what they called sandalwood a long time ago, and now we call cannabis a different thing. I don't know, maybe. It's used in the Rastafarian faith. People that self-identify as Rastafarians, it's actual religion in the U.S., and they have leave from the government to actually use it, from the federal government to use it. And it is actually the root of the word assassin. Another word for a type of preparation of marijuana is called hashish. And there was an very old group of people that were mercenaries, essentially. You could hire them to do pretty much anything you wanted. You could hire them as a personal army, you could hire them to guard your house, you could hire them to go and kill somebody. And they were called the followers of hashish, or the hashashin. And they were called that because one of the major things they did is they were very good at their jobs, but they were also really, really, they very much enjoyed smoking hashish and doing other drugs as well. And so the hashashin, then that name got shortened down and changed to the word assassin. That's the root of the word assassin, comes from hashish. And also the cult of Dionysus in ancient Greece. Dionysus was one of the Greek gods, the Greek god of wine and fertility and lots of other things. And the cult of Dionysus, one of the things they did was they ingested and burned burned marijuana at various rituals. So ways that you can get it into your system. So marijuana is most concentrated, the THC is most concentrated in the resin gland-rich flowering tops of the female plants. And so that's what generally is purchased and what is used for processing and whatnot. Now, the whole plant does contain amounts of THC and CBD. So you can actually smoke the leaves, or you could just even the stems and the seeds and all the parts of it. But it is quite a bit less. It's the resin gland parts, the gland-rich flowering tops of the female plants themselves. So that's just straight leaves themselves. Now there's a thing called kif, which is a powder containing the resin glands. They take them, dry out the resin glands, and then powder them up, and then that's called kif. Hashish is a resin made by from the kif itself, and there's all sorts of other stuff. It's like a drink that's made from the grinding up of the wet grinding the leaves, and then you can make oil by extracting the stuff into oil, by taking the marijuana plants and just putting it into like ethanol or into rubbing alcohol, and then extracting it into some kind of oil that you can either rub on your body as a medicinal thing or that you can eat. And then all the other stuff, that the other minimally potent leaves and other parts of the plant, the stems and the roots even, have a small amount of THC in them. So the effects of marijuana, the positive effects, it has antiemetic properties, which is one of the only ones to have antiemetic properties, which are anti-nausea, essentially, properties. It prevents you from feeling nauseated. And some people do get auditory visual hallucinations at higher doses, not everybody, but at higher doses sometimes with very high THC plants, you can get auditory or visual hallucinations. It stimulates your parasympathetic, so it makes you feel hungry, it increases your appetite, and causes mild euphoria. Nothing like the euphoria felt from like morphine or from heroin, but it does cause a mild euphoria and general feelings of well-being, and then it does tend to relax your body and reduces anxiety and stress and stuff like that. The side effects, it can cause impairment of short-term memory in some people. So if you are doing it more often, you're going to more likely get this whole impairment of your short-term memory. The initial wakeful period after you're smoking weed is definitely followed by kind of this drowsy period. It's very, very tired. You get very tired. It's very hard to function. Mild tachycardia, meaning fast heart rate. So some people get very fast heart rate. Mild temporary dry mouth. So some people experience this, some people don't. That your mouth dries up and you just kind of drink lots of water because you get very thirsty. Mild temporary keratoconjunctivitis sicca, which is the medical term for bloodshot eyes. And then some amounts of paranoia and anxiety in some people. And again, you can reduce these effects by doing this in a safe place where you know the environment and you know the people and not doing it in public and stuff like that. So there's ways that you can kind of, like with hallucinogens, you can reduce the amount of paranoia and anxiety that you get. So medicinal marijuana. When you are going through chemotherapy, chemotherapy is extraordinarily painful and creates very, very intense nausea. So when you are going through chemotherapy, the side effects of chemotherapy are this pain and nausea, and they're extremely intense, very, very intense and horrible. Marijuana can help with those side effects. It helps to reduce the pain and nausea as the side effects of chemotherapy. Marijuana does not cure cancer. I know a lot of people are like, oh, just smoke weed, it cures cancer, it's medicine. No, marijuana does not cure cancer. It simply helps with the side effects of chemotherapy. That's how it's related to cancer in any way. So it relieves the intraocular pressure in glaucoma. So it can also be a treatment for glaucoma. People could actually prescribe it for that. A long time ago, a company came out with a THC in an inhaler that was just a straight THC in an inhaler that was called Marinol, and that has been, I think, shelved or scrapped. I don't remember which. Now in the state of California, it has been legalized for recreational use. So back when I wrote this, it was still illegal. There was no legalization for even medicinal marijuana. Of course, that has changed since then in the state of California. But it is still illegal by federal law. So it is still technically illegal by federal law to possess the plant, to grow the plant, to have it in any form or other, to have it in its oil form or in its actual plant form or whatever, to grow stuff in your garage or in your backyard, or even with a doctor's prescription. But the DEA and the federal government has stated that that's not their priority. They're essentially going to overlook people who are using it medicinally or people using it in states where recreational use is legal. That's not their priority, is to go and prosecute people who are using it either in Colorado, Washington, California, Alaska, I think is also legal. That they're not going to make that a priority. So, yeah, still illegal by federal law. So still illegal by federal law. All right, barbiturates, of which this thing is, are pretty uncommon now. They don't actually have all that much. They're not around all that much. They go by lots of different names: red devils, goofballs, yellow jackets, blockbusters, pinks, reds, blues, Christmas trees. They're usually in a very colorful pill, so they're called all these weird names. And they're mostly they just kind of reduce central nervous system activity and make you kind of sleepy. There's not a whole lot of fun stuff that goes on with barbiturates. Kind of a mild euphoria and drowsiness. And then people who, if you don't go to sleep, if you take a barbiturate and go to sleep, then you're not, whatever, it's just no side effects. But if you kind of stay awake during that, if you mix it with some kind of stimulant, or if you just try to stay awake, you get kind of irritable and aggressive. People on barbiturates get like confusion and have emotional outbursts and whatnot. It's not a super fun drug. I don't know why people do it anymore. Benzodiazepines, this one you may, or your parents actually may have experience with this one. This one increases the GABA receptor activity, so this causes general central nervous system depression. These are anti-anxiety and sleep-inducing medicines, essentially. So this is what's found. These are Xanax, Librium, Valium, all of these. So this is the molecule, and if you look at the R groups on there, all of these, Xanax, Librium, Valium, they're all the same general structure. It just changes the different R groups, whether those are hydrogens or methyl groups or sometimes amino groups or different other groups on there. You can get different drugs that have slightly different effects, whether it's more of like a sleep-inducing one like Valium or whether it's more of just an anti-anxiety one like Xanax. They, depending on what groups are on those R groups, that just means other. That just means there's the rest of the molecules over there. And that's the general structure of the benzodiazepine. Now, benzodiazepines for a long time they thought were not chemically addictive, but they were wrong. They are very chemically addictive, and you have to go through withdrawals. And withdrawal symptoms are similar to alcohol when you are going through withdrawals for benzodiazepines. So mild tremors in the extremities, as well as kind of like fevers, sweating, chills, not super severe like with heroin withdrawal, but pretty dang severe. And the effects of benzodiazepines, definitely drowsiness and reduced anxiety, reduced stress. Those are the positive effects. And then negative effects, benzodiazepines, one of the things that is almost unique to benzodiazepines, there's actually one other one that it also has, is retrograde amnesia. So a very high dose of a benzodiazepine can make you essentially have amnesia. You're not going to remember anything from when after you took it, but also it can cause retrograde, which means you also don't remember anything from before you took it up to a certain extent. It's not like it's going to erase your entire memory. Those are stored in long term, and no drugs that I'm aware of can erase your entire memory. But you can lose sometimes half an hour to an hour of before the actual taking of the drug itself. That's where your short-term memory is stored before it goes into long-term memory. So you can actually not even remember taking the drug if you have enough of it, have a high enough dose. Benzodiazepines are definitely cause dependence and have tolerance as well, so you have to take larger and larger doses, and then do have some withdrawals. There's not a whole lot of other negative effects of benzodiazepines, but since you guys, some of you already probably are prescribed benzodiazepines, or some of your parents possibly have benzodiazepines in the house somewhere, you should know the effects, right? They are dependence forming. They are chemically addictive, according to my research. So use them at your risk, at your discretion. So widely used by students at CDM, obviously not widely used by, but are probably prescribed for a variety of disorders. So yeah, prescribed for insomnia and lots of anxiety disorders, and then the addiction is pretty common, right, and leads to tolerance. What's odd is very commonly somebody will be dependent on a benzodiazepine that does not have any other drug use. It's not like they're a drug user that's like doing cocaine or heroin, or even some people don't even smoke weed or do alcohol or drink alcohol. But they are on an anti-anxiety med. They're on Xanax or some other anti-anxiety med that is addictive. It is very chemically addictive. So it is, it is somewhat dangerous. Okay, so, and then next time we're going to go over the stuff that we missed, MDMA, which is ecstasy, which you guys now call Molly, and then PCP, GHB, absinthe, and then bath salts and nitrous oxide as well. So we'll do that on the final day. Yay.